It Is Well With My Soul by Leah Nietz. Chapter 10. The Author of Modern-Day Racism. Even if we do not personally believe the lie found in Romans 1, which now is called evolution, by not boldly and loudly standing against it, we have given it a spiritual and psychological hold on our society. Satan takes up the authority we refuse to exercise. I should first mention that ethnically, I am First Nation American, Nigerian, Jewish, French, Irish, and Lithuanian. My background includes the most and least evolved races, according to Darwin. My very existence as an ethnically diverse crossbreed flies in the face of his theory. I realize that the following paragraph does not represent the intentional mindset of most people in these ethnic groups. These tendencies rise to the surface when the effects of this evil evolution root gets to the point of producing fruit. The following is a generalization of what Darwin's lie looks like in society when fully manifested. We see these situations rising all over the world right now. White people are falsely elevated and then shamed for being privileged. Black people are erroneously devalued and told they are victims until they despise white people and Asians, whom Darwin placed above them. There is constant tension between Black people and Asians because they are both vying for that spot below Caucasians, with whom they are also both in conflict with. Meanwhile, Native people continue to be corralled on reservations. What else do we have reserves for? Animals. They are given handouts instead of freedom, like animals in a zoo, while their communities are dying in confinement. Many of them take issue with the white man as well. All the division, bitterness, hatred, and anger you see between the races is caused by the Jericho Principality, the lie that is evolution. Evolution requires that you believe people are more or less evolved than you. You cannot believe in evolution without being ethnically prejudiced. Evolution is racism. Evolution's voice pushes those without Christ into the animal kingdom, as it deems us nothing more than highly evolved animals. It should not surprise us when we see people attacking each other like animals. We even now have people identifying as animals, or furries. People have stopped believing in the value of human life because humanity has no intrinsic value in the eyes of evolution. You cannot believe all human beings are created equal or that humanity has any value unless you believe that humans are created and equally valued by their creator. The effects of the lie was put on full display in 1904 when a man named Ota Benga was brought to the United States by a man named Samuel Phillips Verner. Verner was a missionary turned Darwinist who was under contract with the Louisiana Purchase Exposition to gather African pygmies for a zoological display. Ota Benga's entire tribe had been slaughtered by King Leopold's army in his quest to harvest rubber on the backs of slaves. Ota was alone, and he was eventually captured by slave traders who sold him to Verner. Verner bought Mr. Benga for a pound of salt and some fabric. He was brought to the U.S. and put on display with other African people and the Apache chief Geronimo. In 1906, Ota Benga ended up at the Bronx Zoo in New York, where he shared the monkey house with chimpanzees. He was labeled as the missing link in the theory of evolution. Only a handful of black pastors protested and managed to get him freed. He was released to a man named Reverend Gordon, who placed him in a colored orphan asylum. Gordon eventually moved Ota to Lynchburg, Virginia. In 1916, Ota Benga committed suicide at the age of 33. How horrible and shameful that only a few pastors stood up against this gross injustice. It is enraging to think that there was no massive outcry against it. How sound asleep did the church have to be to let this happen on their watch? Are we awake yet? I wanted to be as thorough as possible, So I read The Descent of Man. Aside from being an egotistical, prejudiced chauvinist, Darwin was a horrible writer. If you are in need of a good long nap and/or would like to be righteously angry, this is the book for you. You will be enraged by the severity of his evil ignorance, or fall asleep, or both. In his books, Darwin spends an inordinate amount of time degrading everyone who is not in his Caucasoid category, especially native people. Here are a few quotes. It has been asserted that the ear of man alone possesses a lobule, but a rudiment of it is found in the gorilla, and as I hear from Professor Pryor, it is not rarely absent in the Negro. The sense of smell is of the highest importance to the greater number of mammals, to some, as the ruminants, in warning them of danger, to others, as the carnivora, in finding their prey, to others again as the wild boar, for both purposes combined. But the sense of smell is of extremely slight service, if any, even to the dark-colored races of men, in whom it is much more highly developed than in the white and civilized races. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes, as Professor Schaffhausen has remarked, will no doubt be exterminated. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, for it will intervene between man in a more civilized state, as we may hope, even than the Caucasian, and some ape as low as a baboon, instead of as now between the Negro or Australian and the gorilla. Australian means Aboriginal people. Back to the quotes. The partial or complete extinction of many races and subraces of man is historically known. When civilized nations come into contact with barbarians, the struggle is short, except where a deadly climate gives its aid to the native race. The grade of their civilization seems to be a most important element in the success of competing nations. A few centuries ago, Europe feared the inroads of Eastern barbarians. Now any such fear would be ridiculous. There is, however, no doubt that the various races, when carefully compared and measured, differ much from each other. As in the texture of the hair, the relative proportions of all parts of the body, their mental characteristics are likewise very distinct, chiefly as it would appear in their emotional but partly in their intellectual faculties. Everyone who has had the opportunity of comparison must have been struck with the contrast between taciturn, even morose, aborigines of South America and the light-hearted, talkative Negroes. There is a nearly similar contrast between the Malays and the Papuans, who live under the same physical conditions and are separated from each other only by a narrow space of sea. A certain amount of absorption of mulattoes into Negroes must always be in progress, and this would lead to an apparent diminution of the former. The inferior vitality of mulattoes is spoken of in a trustworthy work as a well-known phenomenon, and this, although a different consideration from their lessened fertility, may perhaps be advanced as a proof of the specific distinctness of the parent races. These are just a few of the positions of the lie we have allowed to go mostly unanswered in the public sector. As the undeterred and vehemently protected lie took root and spread, the slave trade grew in the land of the free. The conscience is not stung so badly when it believes certain people are animals. We buy and sell animals all the time. We also round them up and force them into designated areas. The First Nation people were rounded up like cattle and forced onto reserves, just as the lie decreed they should be. They are still living in that captivity today, as the lie continues to stay rooted in our soil. The Jewish people were also rounded up like animals. They were branded like animals, experimented on, and slaughtered. Hitler and Stalin were both inspired by Darwin's idiotic theory and embarked on a quest to speed up the evolution of man. While we abolished slavery and defeated the Nazis, the foundation that those evils grew from was never removed. A Third Reich stump was left in the ground and has begun to grow branches again. On March 11th of 2021, while I was battling against violent media in our schools, I started reading Ecclesiastes 3, and I heard the Lord say, "The harvest is right at the door." As I read verse 2, "A time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what was planted," he said, "It is time to pluck what was planted." In that moment, I thought he was referring to reaping a harvest from sown seeds of giving or good works or something like that. How exciting! In June of 2022, I went to a prayer meeting at Ohio's State House. As the final speaker began his talk, he quoted Ecclesiastes 3. This prompted me to look this passage up in the Strong's Concordance, and I realized I had misunderstood what God was saying more than a year prior. While his first statement was referring to a great harvest of souls, God was not speaking about a harvest in regards to plucking what was planted. The word plant used in this verse does not mean sow a seed. The Hebrew word is nata, and it means to establish. Many plants and trees need to be established in the soil for a while before you start to see any fruit. They need a good foundation and a sound root system to bring forth a meaningful harvest. Likewise, kingdoms need to be established to have sovereign authority. Plans need to be established to be executed successfully. The Hebrew word for pluck in Ecclesiastes 3:2 is akar, and it means to pluck up, especially by the roots, specifically to hamstring, figuratively to exterminate, dig down, hew, pluck up, root up. It is not a harvest, but a complete removal of something established. I have first-hand experience with establishing and uprooting plants. I planted a few raspberry plants in my raised garden beds a few years ago. At first, I thought they were as good as dead, but toward the end of the summer, they started to grow. The following summer, they grew bountifully and attempted to take over the entire garden bed they were supposed to be sharing with other plants. I decided I should move them to the other side of our house, but as I began the process of digging them up, I realized their roots had spread underground into the other beds. I removed those roots, or so I thought, and transplanted them. However, a few months later, little raspberry plants were popping up all over the lawn around my garden. They were firmly established and determined to take over as much ground as possible. The only way to get rid of them was to make sure not one piece of root was left in the ground. The Romans 1 lie of evolution is an established root, a firm foundation of the enemy from which evil demonic forces can spring up and devour with ease. It has spread underground and infiltrated nearly every part of our society. Every time we think we have made headway against ethnic prejudice, sexism, abortion, etc., it springs back up in another place. Roe versus Wade was overturned, and now we have states amending their constitutions to protect the slaughter of innocent babies. Women gained the right to vote, get a good education, play in sports, etc., only to have to battle men pretending to be women for the positions they sacrificed so much to gain. We abolished slavery, and in came segregation. We finally integrated, and in came the lies of critical race theory promoting resegregation in the name of feeling safe. We will never have victory over these things if we keep medicating the symptoms instead of getting rid of the source of the symptoms. It is like mowing over dandelions and expecting them not to spring back up. You cannot get rid of the weed if you do not pull it out by the roots. The lie that was planted must be plucked up. The principality of Jericho must be destroyed, and the veil of idolatry must be removed. to bring in the full harvest of souls for the kingdom of God. The first card to fall in the devil's house will be the race card. It is a foundational card, and the rest will collapse quickly after it. When the people begin to understand that belief in evolution requires the belief that other people are either more or less evolved than you, thus requiring you to be a racist, they will evict it like Satan falling from heaven. There are few things the majority of the American people and the rest of the Western world dislike more than being labeled a racist. The evolution lie is the author of modern-day racism. The wicked have used the race card to promote division for a very long time. Racism does not exist without evolution. Ethnic prejudice exists, but only as hateful ignorance, not as justified science. When we truly follow the science, we find the Creator.